like know what to call it, but I think so it's just going to be like a general overview of like I think how our current monetary system is structured, and I guess the point is just to kind of relate it to history so we understand, the ideas did evolve in some kind of natural way, although there is ultimately still a mystery. I mean, there's still, we're talking about things that happened even like a few hundred years ago. We don't understand like why people started doing what they started doing. And of course, there's even things that are very well documented. Like if you look at France, in the 17th century or something, like it's still a little mysterious why, like why would the government of France like sign over all their like keys essentially to the kingdom to some gambler guy named John Law, who came up with some weird, kind of Ponzi-like scheme. So why would they do, it's still mysterious. And I'm going to talk about things that happened thousands of years ago. So I guess the point is like to understand there is a mystery of money. The mystery is not necessarily what you think it is. So hopefully at the end of my talk, you'll be confused, but you'll understand you're confused because about the right thing. You'll be confused about like where does the value come from rather than kind of arguing kind of about like kind of stupid stuff like why does that have value or something, right? Like like when people argue about like why do those baseball cards have value, and then they argue with you, but no one really argues with you, I noticed. But then when you talk about Bitcoin, they're like, why does it have value? And then you're like, why does your baseball card have value? And then they say like that's a stupid argument. Yeah. Anyways, that may be I don't know. My point's not to get involved in those arguments, but let me share my screen here if I can do this on this. Okay, now hopefully everything. Better not click on Visual Studio Code just in case. But anyways, okay. So everyone can see my screen.
Excellent.
So okay, so it's essentially like I think if you're really short attention span, you can just like look at this slide and it pretty much explains. It's like there's layers of ledgers. Like all of our money is basically based on ledgers, and there's like layers of them. And there's like a hierarchy of trust where at one end of the there's like a base layer that's like the most trusted, and everyone on a lower layer kind of looks up to the higher sort of base, like the top of the pyramid, so to speak. And you think like that's where like that's the trusted thing. That's the real money. So that's the summary. But let's perhaps start with something. So if you're a developer, these might look kind of familiar. These are like developer docs. So if you're like me and you're like looking at these late at night one day, it just might seem a little odd. Like, what the heck are they talking about? The more you understand about money, this is like a very strange page, right? Or part of a page. It says, what is a test network? Circle APIs represent value in the form of USDC, which is a token running on multiple blockchains. So at this point, you might be thinking like, what the heck does this mean? Like, what is value on multiple blockchains? So you might know what a blockchain is. You might be like, what's it mean for value to be on multiple blockchains, right? So, but probably a lot of people reading this think, oh, I know what that means. It's like, you have these tokens and you can have them on different blockchains. That's all it is. Okay, fine. Then they say these blockchains exist, in basically it exists in different forms. There's a test net and there's a main net. So you can have a blockchain on a test net. And according to them, this isn't real money. So if you read this, it says they are in no way backed by real US dollars. You can see that like highlighted. Actually, you can see that in bold. It says in no way backed by real US dollars. So if you look at that and like if you actually think about what they're trying to say, it seems to be they're saying testnet USDC tokens are not backed by real US dollars, and they feel the need to emphasize real. So those aren't value. I guess those are valueless. So according to this doc by USDC, Circle, I guess, who is a centralized party behind the USDC stablecoin, they're saying that testnet blockchains are valueless. And why is it? Because they're not backed, quote unquote, by the real US dollar. So this is kind of interesting because I think one of the things that convinced me Bitcoin had value is that when I tried to get test Bitcoin to test stuff, it was very hard to get it. It was not that easy. And then, people even sell it to you. And then from what I recall, like each time there's several versions of incarnations of the Bitcoin testnet. Actually, I think they're on version 3 or 4 now. And the previous incarnations all died from this problem of people would begin mining on the testnet, Bitcoin testnet, and it would become very hard to mine like the quote unquote fake Bitcoin. So the fake Bitcoin was hard to get, and then people kind of still needed it to test their application. But of course, what's the difference between the test Bitcoin and the real Bitcoin, right? That's kind of, I think, something maybe we should think about. But actually, one guy has an answer. Right? Actually, many people have an answer. But one guy, like this guy, Wences Cazares, so he's the CEO of Zappos. And so this is a quote from his YouTube video, which I recommend, the Bitcoin the New Gold Standard. I think it's from like 2015 or 16 or something. And then he says, perhaps the biggest myth about money is that money is backed by something, when actually money has never been backed by anything. It is just a ledger. So, I don't know about you, but maybe I should take a look around the room or something if people's minds are blown. Some random guy on the internet, well, I guess he's rich. So some rich guy on the internet has said, like, money doesn't have to be backed by anything. It's just like a ledger. So gets questions like, what does he mean by this? I don't know. But let's just go back to the slide here. So I think, okay, before we kind of delve into what he means, I guess maybe the thing I should mention about Cazares is he actually is a Argentinian, and he grew up in this kind of weird, like, I guess they've had a lot of weird inflation and sort of devastating economic sort of downturns. So for him, it's natural that money is just this like plaything that dictators and corrupt governments just sort of arbitrarily say stuff. Like they're like, this is now worth this, and you just have to kind of trust them, and somehow, like, that's money. So in the end, what's a ledger, right? Ledger is just kind of an arbitrary thing, right? It keeps track of transactions, but ultimately you need to trust it, right? More people trust it, the more it kind of works. But if people don't trust it, it doesn't work. So it's kind of natural, I think, for a guy like this to believe money is a ledger. But there actually is a reason. He's not just some random guy, but he actually loves this book called Debt the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. He apparently gives this book out to like anybody. So if you ever meet him and you want to read this book and you want a free copy, I think you should just ask him, and he has one. They'll like send to you. But the interesting thing about this book is David Graeber is actually an anthropologist. So unlike what you may have heard from economists, if you ask an anthropologist like how money arises, and they study primitive peoples, like even some of the ones that like currently exist in our world, they go out into these sort of isolated areas and see how tribes and stuff conduct themselves with money. And it turns out like the whole barter economy and like money kind of arriving as a solution for double coincidence of wants and so forth, like Adam Smith says, it doesn't actually happen. Instead, what people do is they just kind of keep track of IOUs. It's like, I owe you, Anthony, and then Anthony's like, oh, can I pay you back somehow? Can I fix your house? And I'm like, sure, you can fix my house. And then later, he might be like, well, my house, can you help fix my shoes? Because fixing the house is like a big thing. So that might be like, okay, yeah, okay. After I fix the shoes, we're done. We're square, and that's sort of how people conduct themselves. But of course, eventually, you need something. So, people start using things like collectibles, like tokens, right? That kind of keep track of stuff. So I think, when, someone like Cazares is very influenced by this kind of, anthropological kind of viewpoint. And so for him, like money is naturally a ledger. And why does he like gold? For example, he says Bitcoin is a new gold standard. So presumably he likes the gold standard. So the reason he likes gold is, for him, gold is a physical ledger. So, okay, so gold is like a physical ledger. So, I mean, what I mean by physical ledger, it's like if something's basically limited in supply, right, because it's hard to produce gold, then you have a fixed supply, so you can kind of keep track of transactions that way, right? If Anthony comes to me with 10 gold, I know it's 10, pieces of gold or whatever, as long as they're units we recognize. And if he comes back to me later and says like, I have 10 more gold, then I know it's still, he didn't like produce it out of nowhere. So I know my gold that I received from him the last time is sort of the same value. I'm happy to make the same, trade with him. I'd be like, I'll accept another 10 gold for whatever we traded, the last time. Right. So it's kind of a way of keeping track of things, and it's like a useful, kind of ledger, right? But the interesting thing about gold is it's a universal ledger. I think that's what Kazar would say, right? It's like a ledger that everyone kind of can access, right? And it's not so easy actually to measure gold and all that, but all that technology is like open source in a sense, right? Like everyone can sort of access the same weights and measurements, and we can all sort of understand, what it means, to exchange gold, So, I think collectibles or something like 20,000 years ago, people were like using collectibles. And at some point, like I guess around 5,000 years ago, actually, when, the book Debt kind of takes its starting point, gold started becoming this thing that, different civilizations would use. Like ancient Sumerians really liked gold. And they would sort of have gold in their temples and just keep track of it on a ledger. But that's kind of maybe, I think this talk's going to be a little bit of a potpourri of stuff. But I guess let's go back to the question of like, is money back? So let's go with some modern examples. So maybe you weren't kind of convinced by everything I said, but let's take another tack. So I think we all kind of understand dollars, or we think we do, right? So let's look at different examples of money, like in the modern world. So there's dollars, which I put in quotes for a reason, held at BNP Paribas in France. Is that backed by anything? Right? So I don't know how many people think that's backed by something like the Fed or something. Well, it's funny, but the dollars held by a foreign bank, not by like a subsidiary, in the U.S. or something that's regular, but by something that's not regulated by U.S. government, you're not allowed to have an account at the Fed. The Fed's not going to let you have a bank account with them, right? You're not regulated. If you're just some random bank in the world, you don't have an account at the Fed, so you have no reserves. Actually, you don't have any Fed reserves. So what are these dollars like at if you're like a French citizen, you can actually open a dollar denominated account, and they actually even tell you, like I was looking at some brochure or something of a bank that offers like a dollar denominated bank, and they say something like you can transact, they give you a checkbook that's like in dollars, and they say they can transact instantly. You can use MasterCard, Visa, etc. They're supposed to be dollars, but they're actually not. If you look at what backs them, they're not actually backed by Fed reserves. It actually turns out, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because BNP Paribas is like a global institution, so they actually have a subsidiary like in the U.S. But they're actually different institutions, like more or less, right? They're different ledgers, I guess is the point. So the ledger of a bank in France is actually supported by a ledger in the U.S. So typically, like especially in the earlier part of the later part of the 20th century or something, the dollars in France would be backed by dollars held by, say, JP Morgan. So, BNP Paribas, or, like more like these other older banks, like in France, like Credit Lyonnais or whatever, they would have accounts at a New York bank, right? And the New York bank is their reserves, right? Held their reserves. Now you might say, okay, that's fine. There's some U.S. regulation thing, but they're all backed by real dollars held at JP Morgan Chase in New York. Well, if you kind of dig into what these are, though, I think if people, you guys probably know about you've heard things about fractional reserve banking and stuff. Now, the misconception about fractional reserve banking is that JP Morgan Chase has like reserves from the Fed, and then it's like looks at the number and it's like, okay, I can lend out 10 times that amount or something. I can create IOUs and create deposit accounts. That's not actually what they do. They just kind of create them. They add an entry to a ledger and they say, here's like $5 million. They just create them. And I'll give a reference at the end if you don't believe me, because people have trouble understanding this, I think. But there's a Bank of England document on money creation that's pretty useful. But basically, U.S. banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, they just create dollars, and large banks like J.P. Morgan Chase are not restricted by any reserve ratio. They practice something called sweeping, which, if there's people want to ask me questions later, I can explain what that is. But it effectively makes it so they can generate an infinite amount of money if they wanted to. Of course, there's a problem if they need to settle with another U.S. bank, because the other U.S. bank knows Chase dollars, I guess, are not real dollars, right? Just like Chase isn't going to accept Citi dollars. So it turns out they both have accounts at the Fed, which they consider real dollars. So, okay, so you might say, okay, dollars at the Fed are the real dollars. Well, okay, I think we all kind of at this point know what the problem with that is, which is, there's like a printing, they just print what they want, and they can just print as many as you want. But you might kind of still think, well, there's kind of physical currency or something, right? Like the Federal Reserve notes in your wallet. There's some kind of relationship. There is, but ultimately there's way more dollars held at the Fed on their computers than the dollars in your wallet, right? So ultimately, like, it seems like our money isn't really based on, but actually before 1971, people would have said, I think, that dollars were kind of backed by gold, and they would say there's gold in Fort Knox, right? So it's like half the U.S. gold is in Fort Knox. So but if you ask someone like like the former Fed chairman Ben Bernanke, when he was asked, actually, I think by a gold bug, I think Ron Paul or someone in a Senate hearing, I think Ron Paul from Goldbug asked him, like, why do you have gold? Because they want to say gold's the real money, and something went wrong with the Fed when they went off the gold standard. So Ben Bernanke calmly answers, and there's a funny, hilarious YouTube video of him just calmly saying, it's a tradition. So this is kind of a funny answer if you think about it, because, like, if it's just a tradition, why do central banks even have gold? And why do they seem to buy more gold? There's actually been a lot of central banks, buying a lot of gold recently. So, you have little banks like Poland kind of buying, gold. You have China apparently buying more gold. So it's kind of interesting. Why gold, right? It's kind of, and it kind of, I think, might get back to the whole thing, about the universal ledger, like Kazar would say. So I guess maybe another thing I would kind of say is there's nothing kind of maybe particular about gold. That's what Kazar would say, right? Kazar would say people needed like a ledger, and what's the useful ledger? Turns out gold, it has certain valuable properties, right? Like it's recognizable, it's durable, it's very scarce. So as a related example, you could actually look at wampum, which were these, like, here's a picture of wampum. So as you can see, it's like made from some kind of clams or something, right? I don't know if that's really clam or mollusk or something. Anyways, they're very hard to make though. You need like special tools, and they're not easy to make. You need like a special stone drill to drill these like little necklace beads. And the purple ones are kind of harder to get. I think you can tell from the shell, right? It's harder to make it out of the purple part or something. So the purple ones are more valuable, and then there were the white ones. Now, the interesting thing about this is you might say, oh, okay, the colonizers came and they saw Native Americans using wampum, and they were like, oh, this is convenient to trade with these guys because they believe it's money, foolish people, right? Well, actually, strangely, it's the colonizers that started using it as money. There's no evidence actually that the Native Americans were using it as money. They actually just saw them as very valuable, like, artifacts. So, like, as a village elder, you might have like a lot of wampum because you're like a very important guy. But, or, there might be like for a burial right, you might like, collect some wampum as like gift to the dead or something, various rituals. But it wasn't like something you exchange. You wouldn't be like, hey, I exchanged like this much wampum for your furs or something, and the next time, I'm going to pay you the same amount. This is actually something started by the Dutch settlers, and so they saw it was valuable, so they started using it. And actually, they used it to trade with each other. So the Dutch and the French and various people were actually trading with each other using these wampum shells. And actually, the Native Americans saw that too. So, what do you think happened there? They just ramped up their production, right? And actually, wars started being fought over like wampum production. And actually, at some point, the Dutch became so good at wampum production themselves that I think they kind of helped destroy the wampum market. But anyways, the interesting thing about that is like, it seems kind of like the gold, right? Like, why would you pick this weird shiny metal as like kind of this, as these tokens, right? As money? Well, why did these New Yorkers pick wampum? It just seems like it was very convenient for them. Everyone kind of knew it had value. And the more people believed it and the more people exchanged and the more you realize other people needed it, the more you wanted it, right? So, and then I guess my last funny example is people kind of always say like, okay, stocks, bonds, things, those aren't money, right? Those are backed by like assets or, more fundamental things. But I think it's kind of interesting to think about like, if you think about how these like work in the financial system, often they are seen as money actually, but you have to be kind of a sophisticated financial individual, I think, to take it as money, right? But often like a guy like Elon Musk, right? He's able to essentially own all these properties and, do a lot of stuff, right? Without actually having a lot of quote unquote money, right? Or cash, right? Because he has a lot of Tesla stock, right? Which apparently is almost as good as money now. But, so I guess maybe in closing, I'll just say, there's a very interesting course by Perry Maryland where he talks about the hierarchy of money. So kind of goes into this more systematically, but if you look at the kind of history of the U.S. and how the Fed was formed and pre-Fed and after Fed, it's all very similar. There's like this kind of hierarchy of money where at one base layer you have something like gold, which is like the ultimate reserves in the system, and then you have like higher sort of layers on top of ledgers that use the previous ledger as sort of the settlement layer, right? So if you trade in currency, back in the days of the gold standard, you would settle in gold at the end, right? Even the, ancient Sumerians, that's what they did, right? But then, banks issue, deposits. So like, we're generally happy, if we have bank deposits at the end of the day, if we settle in currency, and that's good. And then, securities dealers or people that deal with that kind of stuff, they like to just settle with each other in, bank deposits, right? So every kind of layer, sort of that's more sort of credit-like, thinks of the previous more money-like as the real money. And the funny thing is it's all kind of the same. Like if you go back to my original thing here, nobody, like, I put quotes around dollars, but you guys might find that a little weird, right? Nobody ever says like, hey, I have Chase dollars. You bank with Citi? You have Citi dollars, right? It's still trading 1-to-1, right? Like when I Venmo you money, like you're gonna get my 10 Chase dollars will be your 10 Citi dollars, right? No one talks like that, right? There's this idea that like there's this kind of peg that's 1-to-1, and everyone kind of obfuscates it. You might read about banknotes or something, right, in the early part of the 20th century, right, where or the 19th century, but I think the Fed was like 1913 or something. So even before then, people exchanged sort of banknotes with each other, and there would actually be an exchange rate that's not quite 1-to-1, and it depended on whether you trusted one bank versus the other. But often in our modern day culture, we don't like Eurodollars, which are these dollars that are held in foreign banks, right? Like we just consider them like $1 to be a US dollar, and then until there's a financial crisis. And then it turns out there's a different interest rate for Eurodollars than like, Fed funds or something. You don't realize there actually is a difference. So until there's a liquidity crisis, we kind of think of every layer like as 1-to-1, right? But it's kind of misleading because obviously every new layer has more sort of flexibility, right? Less discipline than the previous layer, right? And that's kind of how our system is devised, right? We have different dollars all around the world. You have big entities like BNP Paribas that deal with smaller banks in France. It's like a hub and spoke model, right? Smaller banks around the world depend on the bigger banks that are somehow connected to US banks. US banks, right, are connected to the Fed, right? And there's kind of a money, quote unquote, money multiplier effect, like at every level, right? That expands the money supply. But the money, as I said, the money multiplier thing is a little misleading because it's not like it's not really because of the reserve ratio. But anyways, here's some references, and I think they're on the top description. I think I went more than 20 minutes. I think but maybe close to 30 minutes. So I think I'll stop now. And if there's any quick questions.
Excellent. So the evolution of money comes from what's like the cows, then eventually transmutes itself into, like, let's say notes, and then maybe notes coin or gold, and then from gold you get the USD, and the USD is a dominant currency, you say, but there's actually variants in this network hierarchy of trust, and these variants are who is closer to the Fed, right? So money coming directly from the Fed is trusted more than money coming from Chase, but Chase has accounts in the Fed, so that's why they're slightly more trusted than a bank in France, because the bank in France can't have an account in the Fed, so they have to go through Chase. And it seems like the peg is 1-to-1. However, when there's a liquidity crisis, there's differential rates between, let's say, the EU market and the US market. And furthermore, then you have other things that are connected to the dollar, let's say short-term money markets, and then maybe like stock, which is a little more speculative. But there is like these like sort of ripple effects of value. And when there are liquidity crises, then the waters are pulled back and this artificial peg is revealed, right? And eventually we have this thing called DAI, which will solve all problems.
Well, I think I find it interesting. I think one point I would take, though, is what we're seeing with the modern system is, it's a very evolved system. But the point of like the wampum example is like people when there's no system kind of in place because it's like a new world or something, and you're dealing with people that you don't know how to deal with, and you're not sort of all part of the same system, people naturally gravitate and create this base layer. And they kind of bootstrap themselves up, right, and create these credit layers, right? And it sort of seems to, I would say, it sort of always seems to happen. But of course, there is John Graber, for example. The reason like that book's a little hard to read, I think, is, he has his own agenda, which isn't necessarily to explain money. But although the first half of the book is really about explaining money, it's just that he has his own, I think he thinks money is evil. So let me just so money is evil. So it developed that in this certain way. But then he kind of points out at every stage that maybe it's evil. Because if you think about what money does, if you believe money starts out as credit and it's like a ledger to kind of help people maintain their relationships.
Yeah.
At some point, if you don't care about the relationships and you just care about the ledger more, then it's just like with your friends, right? If all your relationships just became a ledger and you're not willing to forgive people anymore their debts, then you don't have any friends, I guess, anymore. But you might have a lot of business partners that you can kind of try to pry money out of, I guess.
I like the liquidity crunch example because it's also just something that happened back in March. And you mentioned that the holdings they had, like Eurodollar holdings in European bank accounts, when everyone was just trying to pile into the US dollar, everyone was basically trying to sell whatever they had to convert it into dollars. The dollar price traded, I think, at like 9% higher than it should. It was like trading at $1.09 for some people. I guess like at the peak of the liquidity crunch, it was 109. So the Federal Reserve even knew this, and you mentioned relationships, but the Federal Reserve extended swap lines to other central banks where they traded dollars for their treasury holdings so they could have dollars. So like Bank of Norway, I mean, it was quite a predicament, right? Because everyone needed dollars, and like a lot of emerging market debt has dollar denominated debt. So yeah, I mean, so is the Federal Reserve just going to let relationship fall apart like that? No, they just extended swap lines and just gave them a bunch of dollars, like just printed trillions and trillions of dollars. There's quite a substantial, like, I think it was really interesting, but I'm glad you brought up that point.
I think as Americans, we understand like the crisis in our, country, but I think as Americans, we don't sometimes realize like how universal the dollar is and how much, the rest of the world really depends on it. So it's harder to understand, I think. I think it took a few years for people to really understand the stablecoin stuff, right? Like, if people, I think initially were like, what's what's the point, of that? That goes against what crypto is about or something, right? But it's like this base layer thing, right? Like, you have to take something that, the wampums were not picked randomly, right? They didn't say like, hey, these guys have a bunch of clams, or, they like observed that, I think one possible apocryphal story is, the colonizers being like, ruthless people. They kidnapped someone very important. And they were like, give us a lot of furs and stuff we value. Otherwise, we're going to like hurt this person. And to their surprise, they got a bunch of wampum. So I think then they realized, wait a minute. But I guess their reaction, this is probably apocryphal, but their reaction wasn't like, no, give us what we consider the real money or the real, valuable stuff. They were like, wait a minute. If we have a lot of wampum and these guys value wampum, then that's money for us, So, but possibly apocryphal. But I noticed, USDC, right? That's a pretty new addition to the, Maker Vault.
Yeah, so we added that in March after when we had our own liquidity crunch at MakerDAO. And we had just Ethereum and basic attention token back, which are correlated assets when ETH was crashing like it was back in March. There was no uncorrelated asset, so we didn't have a stable dollar-based asset. So that was added quite rapidly.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about this later, but I always I guess one thing I don't understand is why that?
Yeah.
Why?
It was like an initial, when MCD launched back in November, it was one of the initial collateral types, but it still has quite a low debt ceiling. It's not used as much, but.
Excellent. So, Will, thank you, Chan-Ho, for the presentation. It was amazing. It creates a context of why MakerDAO is actually doing some innovative work. So, Will, take it away. Do you have anything you like, presentation, or if you want to do it more as a conversation, however you want, here to assist.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me share my screen. All right. I'm going to assume everyone can see my screen here.
Can you?
How about now?
Anyone see your screen?
Yeah, let me try something else.
Maybe you have to give permission or something. I think.
Do I?
Let's see. Here, I'll just try this.
There's like a button that says share screen, and then
how about this?
Take away. I just see. Can anyone see it?
I see like the sharing screen icon, but I don't actually see anything there.
All right, let me try.
Aside from that presentation.
Let's try this. How about this?
Yes.
All right. This is good?
Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Wil Barnes. I'm smart contracts dev at the Maker Foundation. I was going to say, this is the first presentation I've given since we went into this whole quarantine. So it actually feels quite good to be back and part of some social DeFi events. So thank you, Anthony and Chan-Ho, for inviting me. It's really much appreciated.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
So everyone can see a screen, right? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Awesome. So
how familiar is everyone with MakerDAO? Maybe like get a read on that before I start. Maybe I can kind of calibrate what I talk about. If people are familiar with it, then can go a little more deeper into details.
It seems that some people can't see the screen.
Some people can't?
Yeah.
But you can see it?
I can't see it, but who can see the screen? Can anyone just... Always a technical hiccup.
Yeah,
I apologize,
I can see
guys.
it okay.
You can see it okay?
Yeah, like this? Is this good?
Anyone else?
Yeah, so I can see it when I can see it on my when I open up that. Anyways, okay.
Excellent. Now I can see it.
Okay.
Sweet.
So
it was light.
So MakerDAO, and I'll just go through the the definition is a decentralized organization dedicated to bringing financial stability and transparency to the world economy. So MakerDAO, the DAO is, the acronym is Decentralized Autonomous Organization. The DAO enables the generation of DAI, which is the world's first unbiased currency and leading decentralized stablecoin. So DAI aims to decrease volatility through an autonomous system of smart contracts called the Maker Protocol, and as well as decentralized community governance, which I think is the most important part. And I'll discuss that later in the presentation. But the DAI is, like, as I said, the DAO sort of exists to generate DAI, and it's asset-backed security. So it's any DAI that's minted is backed by at least for Ethereum, it's backed by 150% ETH. So it's decentralized in that way, and it's also the way the code is written. Any business or individual can realize the advantage of digital money. You can't be censored, you can't be taken away if it's in your wallet. Like unlike other coins, it can't be blacklisted, it can't be seized from you. So there's actually some, I know we've talked about USDC, and some people talk about like Tether. A lot of people have really strong opinions on Tether. But if we were to compare DAI with other stablecoin models, the fiat cash model being like e-money, as people would call it, Tether, USDC, IntroUSD, all three of these stablecoins right here, by the way, are collateral types on the Maker protocol. And the collateral owner for these stablecoin types is a central issuer, which means that that central institution or authority can issue new stablecoin units. They can burn stablecoin units. They can go and restrict access to certain addresses. They can blacklist addresses. They actually have quite a lot of power. It's at the discretion of whoever owns that smart contract. And a lot of these institutions have actually just cash in bank accounts, which is starkly different than DAI, which DAI itself is an asset-backed stablecoin. It's on-chain. Everything is handled by smart contracts and governed by a community of MKR holders. And anytime like the creation of collateral is maintained by smart contract logic, if a certain vault is under collateralized, it'll be liquidated and returned back to a healthy state. Any collateral is then returned back to the vault. But if you compare that to the third item here, which is basis or ample forth, which is actually much different than the two I just mentioned, is just algorithmic buying and selling of debt and equity tokens. So in that way, I would just say DAI really shows its strength as just being completely on chain. We don't need bank accounts, and you don't need some logic of some algorithm buying and selling debt and equity tokens with no collateral owner. While at DAI, like the collateral owner is the users. So to sort of discuss this again, DAI, the stablecoin itself, as it trades between different wallets and people pass it around, is backed by digital assets used as collateral. And it's built on the Ethereum blockchain, can be used by anyone, anywhere, it can be created by anyone with collateral. And as it is, DAI is an asset-backed stablecoin. It's generated, like it's basically minted. You generate DAI against collateral that's locked in the system. So the process that we do this is, let's just use the Ether as the collateral type. A user will lock ETH collateral into a vault, and they'll generate DAI, and they can generate DAI up until they reach 150% collateralization. Once that DAI is minted, they can use it, spend it, give it to anyone. They can trade it, they can yield farm with it, you can do whatever. There's no restrictions. You can even make your own use case for DAI. But if you take out debt and you have that debt in your vault, and it's you've locked up your own collateral, if you want to unlock that collateral, you have to go purchase DAI on the open market, and then use that DAI to repay the debt. Then you can unlock your collateral. So it's locked. You specifically lock a certain amount of collateral to cover the amount of debt that you end up minting, the amount of DAI that you end up minting. So for every DAI, there should be an excess of collateral, but in a system like like an asset-backed system, if the assets that back the DAI drop significantly and sharply over a very quick period of time, you could end up in a situation where you're under collateralized. So the Maker protocol has mechanisms built into it that will liquidate collateral should it if the price of the collateral drops below and the situation where the amount of DAI that you've issued and minted is less than 150%, a penalty is applied. And it's actually, these liquidations are handled by keepers, which are it's this blockchain software. It's written in Python, but anyone can run it. We have ready to deploy and run keepers that you can find on the Maker protocol GitHub. But when a keeper liquidates a vault's position, they apply a penalty. The collateral is removed from the vault and put to an auction, and the debt is then covered and with the penalty assessed. Once the debt is canceled, if there's any auction collateral remained, it's then returned to the vault. So you could be in a situation where you do get collateral back after your vault's been liquidated if you were underwater. So to make the Maker protocol more resilient and able to handle market downturns, we added 10 different collateral types as of today. The first two, Ether and Basic Attention Token, were added during when Make MCD was deployed in November. And USDC, as you can see here, there's actually two different USDC collateral types, USDC-A and USDC-B. The first one is 2%, and the second is 48%. Right now, the USDC-A type is got a debt ceiling of 100 million, and the USDC-B has a lower debt ceiling, but you can see with this high stability fee, it exists so that people who need liquidity during a liquidity crunch can get it. It's not meant for long-term lending. And you can see the minimum collateralization ratio here for the two, which right now there's a executive vote to decrease this collateralization ratio for USDC-A down to 103%, because if you look at the peg lately, it's trending upward, which is something we're trying to rectify by decreasing the collateralization ratio for USDC. Wrapped Bitcoin was added and was quite a success, and there's been a lot of DAI minted against Wrapped Bitcoin. True USD is another stablecoin. So we focused on adding stablecoins because they're uncorrelated. Typically, when Ether drops, BAT drops as well, sort of walk in unison from time to time, but not always. And then there's also, we have Kyber Network, CRX, Mana, Tether, and Pax standard. So these two were added just recently. I wrote the spell to deploy these, and they were deployed. So the spell is parlance for an update to the system. So Tether and Pax were deployed on September 8th, so just very recently, 2 new additions. And the point that I wanted to make here is that MakerDAO's community decides which of these assets that we're going to include. Most of the work to onboard them happens on the forums or in chat, where community members will weigh different options, look at the risks associated. They'll look at the smart contract risks, determine if we need to write new code for deploying that or adding that specific collateral type. And I think that's important because since I work for the foundation, and the foundation is just a small part of MakerDAO, which is the greater part of MakerDAO is the community. Once the community decides what they want to implement, it's basically me and the team that I work for will go and take the information and put together the code to deploy it. So this slide here, you see this screen right here is actually the vault. This is where you can manage your vault. So you can see here, this is just dummy data. This has 1 ETH locked and a liquidation price of $75. So if the price of Ether dropped below $75, then this would get liquidated. right now, you can see it's actually quite a healthy collateralization ratio. This is from when ETH was just a bit cheaper. ETH's actually doing pretty well right now. So if the price were to drop below 75, then this vault would, there'd be keepers that would be looking for this under collateralized vault, and they would grab the collateral and auction it off, and then they would return any excess collateral back to this vault. This is where you would manage everything yourself. You can see over here, this wallet's balances. You can see these buttons here, like you can pay back your DAI, generate more DAI. And all this is handled through this link right here. This is the MakerDAO front end, oasis.app. You can also go to oasis.app and trade. You can trade DAI for other assets. And I like, so this slide right here I think is important because this shows the permissionless nature of DAI. So USDT, Tether, the owner of the contract, can destroy anyone's funds. And if you look at the code here, destroy black funds, address of a blacklisted user. As you can see, this only owner modifier here requires that the user is blacklisted. They'll basically zero out that user's funds, and that's it. Reduce the total supply by the dirty funds. That's like one address which is owned by I don't even know who at Tether has this power to do this. It's quite. I mean, they have restricted funds before. Recently, I think there was some news articles the past couple of months of Tether actually doing that. And similar deal with USDC, they can blacklist users and also prevent blacklisted users from sending funds or receiving funds. You can see not blacklisted to addressed. So the selling point I wanted to make here is that none of this contract logic exists in DAI. If you hold DAI, then no one can censor it from you. No one can. You always have a claim on some underlying collateral in the Maker protocol. So to change the topic here a bit, what can DAI be used for? DAI can be used for, I always think DAI can be used for pretty much anything. It's use cases, you can create use cases for it, but for the sake of this discussion, it can be used for disaster relief, donations, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a use people do right now, remittance, any kind of financial inclusion. You could pay someone in DAI and they could use it and then convert it to USDC if they wanted, convert it to Ether or even to Bitcoin. Payments, trade finance, trading. A lot of people just generally trade and DAI. There's like Uniswap itself is very liquid. You can use it for loans, leverage. That's a popular use case. And I'm sure some folks on the call have heard of yield farming. So a huge use case right now is a lot of DAI being pushed to yield farm here in the open finance DeFi section. So an actual specific use case, and I think this is important because I know quite a bit, several Argentinians who find a lot of value in DAI because it's stable in a region with high inflation rate. So they can convert their Argentinian pesos into DAI. And then when they actually need to make purchases in Argentinian pesos, they can convert it back from DAI into Argentinian pesos. So even before DAI existed, Bitcoin was quite popular, but it's also quite volatile. So DAI presents itself as a stable asset, unlike Bitcoin, that people can use as a store value. So another use case is it's more tailored towards people who need privacy, because on the Ethereum blockchain, it's a public ledger. So while you could remain pseudonymous, sometimes you don't. Like if someone with enough time could probably track down like your transaction history and look at what you're doing with your money. But Aztec and zero knowledge proofs allow for confidential transactions to you can basically trade DAI with privacy. I don't use this I actually don't use this because I just don't have a need for it. But some people do, and if this use case is available for those that do. So why are these projects choosing DAI? For the reasons I just mentioned, I think permissionless is one of the most important aspects. Is you don't need to ask permission to any central entity. Once you have DAI, it's yours. You have a claim on the underlying collateral always. That's just written into the protocol, and that's how the code enforces it. And liquidity, DAI can be easily traded on chain. You can go to Uniswap right now and find deeply liquid markets. Well, in certain situations, when DAI is in demand, when people are trying to cover their debt, it could be less liquidity, but that you have to understand the way the market works there. You can take it to centralized exchanges and trade it there. Most people you will interact with that are using DeFi protocols will understand what DAI is. And composability, which I think is something personally I love this about DAI, is that you can use it in atomic transactions. You can like build it into other things. You can do flash loans. You can do all kinds of interesting things with DAI. And to discuss a bit about composability here, which is one. So I've actually mentioned Uniswap several times. You can combine several different products in a single transaction. And so, for example, here you have 100 DAI, and you go to Uniswap and trade that 100 DAI for half an ETH. You take that half ETH and trade it on Oasis Trade for 110 DAI. Now you have $10 profit, 10 DAI profit. Same thing can be done with, or one thing to be aware of here is if this trade fails, the only thing you will pay is gas fees. But I will caveat that by saying that recently gas fees are quite high these days. I think in the past couple of weeks I've seen them up $300 or $400, 300-400 gwei per unit of gas, which is quite substantial. So you can go a step further here and do a flash loan from Aave. So with flash loans, you can borrow DAI without collateral or credit, but you must pay back that DAI within that block. So if you don't, the transaction will just fail and revert. So here, let's say we borrow 100 DAI in a flash loan from Aave. We take it to Uniswap, convert that 100 DAI into ETH, and then take that half or 0.5 ETH to Oasis Trade and convert it to 110 DAI. We pay back the flash loan. We pocket the $10 DAI difference. People do this, and they do it quite frequently. It does require some requisite knowledge of solidity, but it is possible, and people do it. So these are just two examples I find quite nifty of composability on Ethereum blockchain using DAI. And you can also get a little more intricate with it as well, do crazier things. So for those that are developers, we have several libraries available here. DAI.js if you're a JavaScript dev, Web3.js, Ethers.js, and Python. If you like Python, you have PyMaker. And I mentioned this earlier, but our Keeper software is written using PyMaker. It's pretty much all in Python. So PyMaker is a really good library if you just want to interact with vaults, lock collateral, mint DAI against the collateral you've locked, and so forth. And yeah, so it's an open source protocol. Anyone can integrate with the multi-collateral DAI smart contracts. A bunch of projects built on top of it. I mean, a lot, like Aave is integrated with MCD. All of the new DeFi protocols have used DAI or interact with it. I don't know if people have been paying attention to YFI. There was the YETH vault, which used a very large vault to move a bunch of money around. Anyone can do it. There's no restrictions on it. If you have collateral, it can be locked into MCD. So, and lastly, I think this is a part of the presentation that I think is quite interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, the Maker Foundation, which I work for, is just a small portion of the MakerDAO, the greater community, which the foundation exists to bootstrap MakerDAO, fuel growth, and prepare the protocol for complete decentralization. The foundation itself does not vote. and is planning its own dissolution. So within a couple years, we'll have completely decentralized the community and dissolved the foundation. So it's interesting. It's a different arrangement, and I think it's important to point out that when I say like we, or at least at the Maker Foundation, we implement what the community decides upon in the roadmap that they decide. So if you look here, MakerDAO consists of Maker Protocol, which is the smart contracts and Oracle setup, and the Maker community is here with the Maker Foundation being within it. And again, this is just a slide to add emphasis to that. The Maker Foundation exists solely for bootstrapping. It's the Maker teams and departments, of which I'm part of the smart contracts team. And then there's the governance community, which drives all the changes to the system. And there's a domain team here, which I'm slowly starting to transition into as we continue to decentralize the community. Then there's ComDev, community contributing team, contributors and educators, people who support the protocol in their free time and also accept grants to work on the protocol. Then there's a larger ecosystem, development teams, integration partners, businesses. And then you would think of like the DeFi community, people who actually work to integrate with the community. And then I would say there's an uninitiated section here for people who just may have DAI in their wallet, like transiently traded, they just have it to hold value temporarily, or they're going to trade it for something else. There's plenty of people who fall into this bucket. So community members, DAI users, vault owners, auction keepers. I keep mentioning that, the Pi Maker auction keepers, which will liquidate vaults that are unsafe. MKR holders, which vote for which changes they want at the foundation. The foundation that I'm a part of, and there's a risk team, independent researchers, independent developers, and then third-party projects and businesses who integrate with the Maker or with the DAO itself. And all this to circle back also on how does Maker, how does the DAO maintain itself? What kind of levers does it have at its disposition? Well, for example, the DAO sets stability fees and the DAI savings rate. Much of this right now, given the high demand for DAI, is what I would say pretty close to very low interest rate, zero interest rate environment. DAI savings rate is actually 0. Stability fee for Ether is 0. And these get decided on weekly, and rate changes occur on a weekly basis. Whenever the community decides what rates they feel is acceptable, given the risk appetite and the current market environment. On Friday, new rates will be the new spell that has the new rates that the community has decided upon will be deployed, and then Maker holders will vote on those rate changes, and if it passes, then that spell is applied to the system and rates are changed automatically. So decide which collaterals are supported. We've been moving quickly to add a bunch of collateral. As I mentioned earlier, we added Tether and Pax Standard, which is the USD stablecoin Pax, and elect new Oracle price feeds, change the debt ceilings. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, we have a spell to increase the debt ceiling by about $125 million. To give more support to people who are using DAI. Right now, there's a big demand for DAI for yield farming. So minimum vault collateralization, also mentioned this earlier as well, reducing the vault collateralization ratio for USDC-A down to 103% pending a successful vote. And then penalty fees, like the liquidation penalty, is 13%. So weekly executive, which is used to make stability fee and debt ceiling rate changes, and there's a monthly governance cycle where we typically use that to deploy new collateral types to the system. The most recent was Pax and Tether. So this is the I would say a call to action. I think this is the interesting thing is because anyone can get involved and it's quite easy. This Thursday we have a governance and risk call where we debate exactly that, governance and risk. Sometimes it can, they can be interesting discussions to be had, and there's a lot of opinions, and a lot of people have different ideas on how the DAO should move forward. And it's all discussed here on the forums, and then even on chat, you can talk to developers and community members in real time. So I would suggest checking out this week's governance and risk call. Last week we were discussing, or the community was discussing, real world assets. So actually non-crypto assets, actually thinking about onboarding, invoicing, trade financing, invoices, which is a new topic, but very interesting. So for those that are interested, do join if you can, or check out the forums and see what people are talking about. Everything, the forums and these governance and risk calls, and even chat to an extent, is where the DAO, this is where the roadmap for the DAO is created and executed. So that is the, if that's the takeaway, if there's a takeaway for you, I would ask you to come to the governance and risk meetings. But there are incentives. There's community development grants to fund individuals and teams building tools and resources for governance and risk management, DAI adoption, helping build emerging economies, and so forth. There's been a lot of community built websites like Maker Analytics, MakerGov.science, CureDAI. It's quite a rich community of developers that all build things they find useful, that we all collectively use. So, and if you participate in the forums, you can also get paid for your participation. So yeah, that's the last slide. I've already said that a couple times, but yeah, do join in the debate. It's actually quite fun. So I would also, if anyone has any questions, I can go back to some of these slides. I wanted to get through it real quick because I wanted to leave about 15 minutes for any time to answer anyone's questions.
That amazing presentation. I really want to thank you, Will, for taking the time to I won't say demystify, but introduce us even further and deeper into the workings of MakerDAO. It's a DAO. It's real life. It's working. It's underpinning a lot of sort of commerce now today. It's impressive to see this not only this product, but a social experiment and new forms of human collaboration. So I just want to thank you for taking the time, being part of such a cool project.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you for being here. So questions. This is a decentralized central bank, basically.
Yeah.
Any questions? You can type it in and I'll read it out if you want to keep your anonymity. It's okay. Like questions or one question Hassan had was, would the slides be available after the talk?
Yeah, I can share them. Yeah, I think there's some good links in there too for
yes.
Yeah, I will share those for sure.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. So my question was in regards to those different aspects of the MakerDAO governance when you said that there's the different setups that are there right now. Just curious about like in terms of scale of people that are there, like how big are the team that you work with and the other teams that are more on like the centralized part now? Just curious.
Yeah, the team that I work for at the foundation is there's 7 smart contract devs. The foundation is about a little less than 100. A lot of the discussion happens on the governance and risk call, and that could be anywhere from I've seen it. It's on average between 40 and 50 people that meet every Thursday to discuss certain topics. There's a lot of, if you look at the forums, there's a lot of people who contribute and actually guide discussions that they'll like read, try to gauge what the community wants, and they'll actually create polls. They'll discuss things in detail. If there's a lot of appetite for certain things, they can actually get big groups of people together to do on-chain polling, and then actually schedule big changes, assuming that they can get this requisite votes to pass a certain spell. Did I answer your question correctly?
Yep. Was the answer? Was the question answered correctly, sir? Person who answered.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
it was.
Cool.
Thank you.
Excellent. Next question. Now's your chance. All right. Somebody posted a question. I'll read out loud. Jay says, "Could minting DAI with cash collateral be an alternative to ETH as a platform for issuing new cryptocurrency? A new cryptocurrency." Thanks, Jay.
So you could, by cash, do I mean you just mean? Well, technically, you could use cash to buy USDC, and then use USDC to mint DAI. Or you could do the same for the dollar-backed stable or dollar-pegged stable coins like TrueUSD, Tether, and
Paxos.
USDC.
Right?
Yeah, Pax.
Yeah. So you can essentially put your money into a company that or some sort of entity that creates these digital versions of it, and then put it into DAI, and then use that as collateral, essentially. Which would be the same thing as putting your money, let's say, into some sort of ATM and then gets accredited into some sort of ledger.
Yeah. So it's that way because in case of a liquidation, you need to be able to take those assets and auction them off, and then return whatever's left to the vault owner.
Yeah, imagine using hard cold cash would be much harder.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Next question. Thanks, Jay, for asking. Don't be shy, guys. Is there anything that confuses you? Is there anything that interests you? Is there anything that excites you?
So actually, another question I have was, it was really interesting, that example that you showed of, the instant loan and that kind of like arbitrage process. Just curious, in your own experience, what's been like the most interesting arbitrage process that you've come across with the use of DAI, other than that example I was shown?
So I would say arbitrage example. I mean, people have used it so people will use, if they have certain collateral type that they want to, so like if they want to repay a vault and then take out debt with a different collateral type, they can use DAI in a flash loan to grab however much debt they have, cover that debt, and then cycle in the new collateral. So like if they have Ethereum-backed debt, Ethereum-backed collateral, and they want to collateralize the debt with wrapped BTC, they can use a flash loan to grab as much debt as they have, pay back the debt, and then swap the collateral out and then mint the DAI. So then they pay back the flash loan and then reissue the DAI that they had, which that's actually really interesting. That's how, like, if someone wants to cycle in and out of an asset that's faring poorly, which, I mean, in my opinion, it's never ETH, but ETH does have times when it drops. I would say if they wanted to change the risk appetite from ETH to wrapped BTC, flash loan is available for them in that situation. Because like that user may actually also not have that much DAI. They may have traded some of it away. So like if they have, for example, 10,000 DAI of debt, and they only have 5,000 DAI, they can just take a flash loan to cover that amount, and then replace the collateral with something else.
Excellent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just curious of the different use cases out there, so that one's good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, you said something really interesting, actually, Will. And to dovetail on what Chan-Ho was saying, so Chan-Ho said that money has these properties, right? It's fungible. It's a unit of accounting. It's durable. But you mentioned something. You said DAI has this property of composability.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because the gold can only be composable if you turn it into, let's say, a chain, right? And a lot of rich people, like, if you're trying to get money out of a country in a hurry, you get on a plane, you can wear a ring, easy to get out, right? I think me and Chan-Ho had this conversation. That's the limit of composability for gold, is to turn it into a gold chain. But DAI allows for a greater degree of composability. And I think maybe if to convince people, or to maybe as an argument point, or as a point to introduce the concept of why DAI is money, one can say, well, money has these properties, right? The aforementioned ones. But then you also have this thing of composability, which is it's a money block which you can use to do other things in a permissionless way, right? You can use this to programmatically create flash loans or new types of instruments. And in some sort of archaic way, the dollar, the representation of some credit in a ledger, right, can be done with that, but you still have to go through the wetware of people and institutions. With DAI is all automatic. So it's a permissionless composability that has almost no friction.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have collateral, you could just there's no one's going to stop you from minting DAI against your collateral. Like you can do it. You don't have to ask for permission. You could do it in seconds. It's pretty cool. Or as long as it takes to get into a block.
Awesome. Let me ask you a question. Is there plans to expand the protocol to other blockchain platforms that are coming out? Say Polkadot has something at some point, or Cardano if the future arrives at some point?
Nah, not at the moment. Definitely not at the moment. I know, there's a lot of like right now DAI is there's like a hackathon where with Near Protocol. So I think there's like a DAI centric focus there. So I think no specific plans yet, but people do experiment with hackathons and like using like the Near Protocol bridge. I think there's actual hackathon where they're trying to create some software there, but
nice.
Nothing official. Yeah. That would be like a decision that the community would have to make, though. So I mean, it's really up to the community, and I do keep saying that, but it really is the truth. If they had the appetite for it and voted it through, and it made it through governance, that we would start exploring that. So
amazing. So there you go, Mighty Byte. Yes, Mighty Byte can speak. Can you unmute yourself?
I thought I did. Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you, Mighty Byte.
Can't hear you now, though.
Oh, yeah, we can't hear you now.
There. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Sorry about that. I know that Tether USDT trades on multiple different blockchains. Are there any plans for Maker to also do that?
No, well, not that I've seen. I know it's been discussed in the forums and people have brought it up, but I haven't seen the community discuss any concrete plan to do that. It's a little, I would say, at least in my opinion, it's easier for Tether to do that because they're a central issuing authority. Like they're on Omnia, they're on what is it, Tron, Ether, Ethereum, and they've also discussed. Where else? Was there talk of Tether joining or going on Solana or something? I don't know. I can't.
I did see an article about Solana. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's actually happened or not.
Yeah, I would just say, at least my opinion, so the community has not decided to do that yet. If they do in the future, it's definitely if they feel that's what's required. But I think I'd say, in my opinion, it's hard for a decentralized, bit of a decentralized protocol when there's no like central issuing authority. There's a little more complication there. But
that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you, Mighty Byte. Jorge de la O has a question and comment. Real-time decentralized finance / bank? Maybe. Unthinkable? ? Can a bank truly become decentralized with any point of centralization? Take reactions to that comment / question.
I mean, it takes gradual decentralization. There's, you still have, right now, we have a decentralized Oracle set up, so there's still like a list of oracles that we rely on, but in the process of making that more and more decentralized. And there's always certain points that could be improved upon, but that's the whole purpose of gradual decentralization and the foundation working to dissolve itself, at least as aggressively as possible, which is what we're doing right now.
Excellent. So two questions for me, I guess. Well, I guess it's more of a question and then one's kind of a comment, and then we'll leave Chan-Ho with the closing thoughts. And then we dovetail everything back together. So I guess the question would be related to how does an organization sort of gradually devolve itself? That seems to be an interesting undertaking into itself, right?
Yeah, it's quite difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy. We're working really hard to get the community more involved. Like right now, we have community members doing smart contract collateral assessments. They'll go look at the code. They'll post their findings on the forums and discuss it. And then we have people focused on risk. We have people focused on, like, we have a governance facilitator that works for the grants program, and he like basically facilitates maker governance. He drives it. I mean, this is someone he's not a part of the Maker Foundation. So that's how we're doing it. We're slowly getting more people and autonomous actors, people like. The goal is that there's this ecosystem around that's not the foundation. So like as the community grows bigger and bigger, the foundation shrinks, and even like to the point where foundation members become autonomous actors not affiliated with the foundation. So right now there's some things that, like if you look at the market events like globally over the past 6 months, there's things we're working on as a foundation that the community is explaining they need, like improved liquidation mechanisms. So as we get those out of the way, like it'll be easier for third-party and autonomous actors to just take control of the system as we hand over, like on a like gradual timeline. It's not just something that happens immediately.
Overnight. I guess Martin has a good point that dovetails on what you're saying, which says I think it's important to distinguish: can a decentralized bank be developed, or can an existing bank become decentralized? The second is pretty difficult, I think. If it's hard enough for an organization of less than 500 people to do so, I imagine Citibank with tens of thousands of people will be much harder. So there's an advantage for starting small and then decentralizing.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So I guess I'll skip my question. And Chang-Ho, close it off. Do you have any questions?
I actually have a question about because I thought it was pretty interesting that Will went through like a couple flash loan examples, right? So like if you look at the DAI, right, like versus the other stable coin, there seems to be like a premium, right? And part of the premium seems to be right because of the value of the composability, right? Like you don't care about paying a few percent if you want to like 1000x or whatever seems normal now to some people. I mean, some of the DeFi things, I mean, they're obviously kind of scams or something. They're offering like 1,000,000% annual percentage yields, right? But so I guess my question is like, I guess given that you show it as like a feature in your talk, and I know some community members from what I saw in the forums, like they get very concerned, when DAI is like stuck at like $1.02. Like they're like very concerned. But now it's been like, going around like 105, 106 today. I guess it went down a little bit right now, but like it could kind of persist there for a while, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess, is this something to be concerned about, you think, or it's just like,
So DAI is, I think it's definitely something we're working on. I'd say it's like something we're trying to improve upon, but DAI is just, it's in demand. I mean, the people are using it to yield farm. So, and we also have to weigh other risks like the actual debt ceiling. We don't want people to just mint, 1 billion DAI. There's a bunch of risks that the risk teams are managing. So yeah, when there is a cap like that, we do end up in a situation where it does trade at a premium. But it's difficult, and it's because it's an asset-backed system, and we require 150% collateralization. It kind of creates that natural premium. So,
right.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be: is it like? Do you think it's a danger if it becomes like a stable coin that's more like kind of in a band between say $1 and like 120 or something?
I think. I would not want it to see trade at 120, because if you're in a situation where people need to pay back DAI debt that they issued at $1, that's kind of breaks the agreement that they had with the protocol. Because if you just, if you minted, it's kind of the same with the Fed, right? Like that's why the Fed tries to maintain inflation. I think it's not an apt example to compare MCD and the Fed, but that's why they put price stability as an important, it's like the mandate for the Fed, price stability and maximum employment. But you want to give people a chance to pay back their debt. A peg or a soft pegged currency that at least oscillates around that dollar peg.
Interesting. So if anybody wants to join a Fed or eventually start their own country, the best place to start would be joining the MakerDAO board and figuring out how central banking works. I think it's for anybody interested in finance or economics, always doing it is better than reading about it. This is a fantastic opportunity even for people in traditional finance to see, how a community would manage a currency. I think that it's amazing work that you guys are doing, and I'm highly impressed and super excited to see what this is going to be in 6 months.
Yeah.
1 year. Beyond 5 years, I don't know. Maybe who knows? I can't speculate. Chan-Ho, close it off.
Nah, I don't think I have anything more to say. I just think it's a great talk, Will. I'm probably going to look at the slides. I think the thing I got from your talk though is like I didn't realize. Yeah, I mean you have calls every week, right? I kind of it seems like obvious, I guess, because a lot of projects do. But it seems like a good way to learn because I read some of the forum things, and like Anthony's saying, like some of the community people are very smart, so it's very intimidating. But I guess if I can hear the kind of natural flow of conversation, hopefully it'll be a little bit less intimidating.
Yeah. It is tough though. I mean, it's an hour call that usually reliably goes into about an hour and 15 minutes until the governance facilitator is like, all right, we got a hard stop it here. But yeah, it is. It's interesting to see the governance and risk call because you'll see it like the heartbeat, what people are talking about, get like a read on the pulse of what people want to happen.
Excellent. Yeah. And with that being said, that's a good way to close it off, Will. I'm gonna issue, unless you want to keep going, we can issue a hard stop. But formally, the event is over. If you want to continue to talk, that's okay. But I would say we put at the clock. We started a little late, but we ended about at similar time. So again, thank you, Will, from MakerDAO for taking time to speak with us and enlighten us about the future of a central bank and human cooperation across the world. This is cooperation in terms of money, cooperation in terms of actually regulating the money, and it's a refreshing take on, instead of an independent central bank being closed, this is actually the exact opposite, and somehow it's still working. It's independent, but somehow it's interdependent, an interdependent central bank. I find it, from just a sociological point of view, highly impressive. Probably be a book written about this at some point. But
thank you. Well, thank you, Anthony. Thank you guys,
Thanks.
Anthony, Chan-Ho, for inviting me. I really appreciate
Thank you, Will.
it.
I appreciate it.
Thanks,
If you guys
Will.
want to stay on to shoot the shit, that's cool. But Will be even.
Yeah, we're always happy to shoot the shit. As they say.
Excuse my accent. The forum meeting has been over. Yeah. So this is if you want to jump off, well, that's okay. Jorge de la O says thank you. Jianping Zong says thank you. Martin says thank you. I say thank you. I appreciate it, guys. And
maybe we could collect. I mean, sometimes people are a little shy. We could if you don't mind, Will. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could just collect some questions, like if people, you want to, you could put it in the Discord or just Slack, right? And we could forward them to Will.
Yeah.
Like a more abbreviated, condensed sort of, thing of whatever people are wondering about.
Yes, exactly. So join the Discord, join the Slack. They're inside the meetup descriptions. If you came from Big Apple DeFi, which specializes on decentralized finance, join the Discord. If you're near NYC Blockchain Devs, which looks at the actual technical workings of these decentralized ledger technologies and projects on top of them, then join the Slack and just shoot them at us, and we'll forward them to Will, and he can give you a spectacular response like he's been doing the whole time. But thank you guys very much, and if you want to stick around, you can. You're not obligated to. So thank you. Okay.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Will.
Good night, Will.
Good night. Awesome. Great.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will, I guess, terminate the recording of this now, since I dropped one
Yeah.
S-bomb.
Jay's hiding.